Hello, this is Mad Cat, angry egalitarian that discusses this and that. And today is the first annual International Day.
Hello,
oh
this
shit!
is Mad
Sorry.
Cat, angry egalitarian that discusses.
There we go. Sorry for that. So, yesterday was the first annual International Day of the Girl, officiated by the UN. There have been other instances where that day has been celebrated. I don't know if they were all on the 11th, but yesterday was announced by the UN as the official day for girls. However, in my research, I did not find an official day for boys at all. And nor has the UN ever announced that there is a day specifically for boys. There, of course, is the International Men's Day, which was the only thing that really came up in my research. There was also International Child Labor Day. But with the International Child Labor Day, that also encompasses girls, although there seems to be more focus on girls than there are males. There is, and then with International Men's Day, wow, it's really growing dark. All right, let me turn the overhead light back on. All right, so for International Men's Day, it's for men and boys. But again, we should really have a day specifically for boys. Now, in doing this video, I want to make a couple of things clear. I am not saying that we shouldn't have a day for girls. Not in any way. If I was doing that, I would have made a video yesterday saying how completely useless the holiday is. I didn't do that, so obviously, I'm not against girls having their own day. There are a lot of atrocities that happen to girls in the world today that do need to be addressed. However, if girls get a day, then boys need to get a day. Or any other gender you want. This is about equality, right? So why celebrate one and not the other? And that's what I'm doing today, is I'm bringing awareness to celebrating boys in the world today. The second thing is I want to give a trigger warning. It's kind of weird for a man to give a trigger warning, especially one that finds most trigger warnings to be bullshit. But this video is going to have some pretty horrific stuff. A lot of it people already know, but there may be some things that you hadn't known. So I give fair warning that it's going to be a pretty bad episode today. I unfortunately have a lot to go through and little time to do it, so I'm going to be going through things pretty quickly and not really having time for discussion. But the overall point of this video today is that there are a lot of boys in this world that need help, that need our help, and they're ignored. Why? Why are they ignored? Because the world is convinced that boys who later grow up to be men have all of the power, and they don't. It's a misnomer. It's also assumed that any girl or woman is automatically a victim, to where boys who are suffering are largely ignored. And despite countless evidence out there to the contrary, it is still widely believed that boys don't matter. And that's what this video is about today. To not only show that boys do matter, but also to show how the world tries to forget them. Whew. Sorry, this is going to be also emotionally tough for me to do today because there's just a lot to go over. So we're going to get started. Let us go here. And if you're interested in coming on to the show today and talking about anything, feel free to message me on Twitter or in the chat, and we'll try to get you on. Like I said, I'm going to go through this stuff pretty quickly. And as you can see, I've got a lot of tabs to go through. So we'll start off with teacher sex offender list, 25 female teachers and student sex crime scandals. Now, this list was actually pretty easy to find. In fact, there are other lists that list as much as 200 of these teachers. So this is only like just a handful of them. So much of this kind of describes what's going on, but they don't fully go into like what happened after the fact. It looked like whoever collected this just collected the initial story, but didn't do any follow-up thereafter. So a lot of these I'm just going to skip over. Now, some of them are for girls, and yes, girls can be a victim of female teachers as well. But again, this is a focus on boys. And one other thing I do want to focus on, make mention of here, is that everything I show today is specific to boys. Okay, not to men. Now, there's a little bit of crossover here and there, but this is specifically about boys. And there are also going to be things that I skip over. The most common things that we hear about, like circumcision, that's talked about a lot. I wanted to try to explore some of the things that are not talked about as much as they should be. So let us scroll through here. So we'll start with Margaret de Barricua. So at the age of 30 of the time of the crime, was an intermittent teacher at McClatchy High School in Sacramento when police officers found her and a 16-year-old male student behind the school in the parking lot. During the February of 2009 arrest, responding officers noted steamed up windows, the car's occupants moving rhythmically, and an infant child strapped in a safety seat inside the vehicle. Investigators eventually learned that the male student had actually seduced her over time, and finally the woman gave in to the underage student's sexual advantages, which led to the incident behind the high school. Now, she was charged on 4 counts of statutory rape, but was forced to serve 1 year in prison as part of her sentencing. Now, on one hand, it's like, well, he seduced her, so she was the victim. No, she was the authority figure, and she shouldn't have given in to the sexual advantages. And when they first happened, she should have reported it, and she didn't. She allowed it to happen. She's an authority figure. She should have been strong enough to say no and rectify it. She allowed it to happen. Yeah, boys are horny. And it's not like he's completely guiltless in the situation, but still. And there's often the argument that, you know, something I've heard, and not that I fully agree with it, but like children these days, especially around the ages of 16 and 17, are mature enough to make a decision about sex. Again, this is an issue for another time. However, I will stress on this that even if a 16 or 17-year-old is mature enough to have sex with an adult, a teacher is not the person to have sex with. Your teacher. Because they are an authority figure, and that is an abuse of power. So I do want to stress that right there. Some people might say, well, he was 16. He knew what he was doing. He seduced her. She's still an authority figure, and it's still an abuse of power. Because if the roles were reversed, if the genders were reversed, and it was a male teacher who was seduced by a 16-year-old girl, everyone would hold him in contempt. So it goes both ways. Sandra Beth Giesel, 42-year-old teacher at Christian Brothers Academy in Albany, New York. In September 2005, allegation and criminal charges arose surrounding her sexual contact with multiple male students. In the end, Sandra Beth was noted for having sexual relations with at least three students, although Grisel claims that the later two were involved with her sexually against her will due to attempts to blackmail the woman. In the end, the testimony and evidence against her was overwhelming, including claims that she was intoxicated while on the job, actually getting arrested for DUI while waiting trial, and allegedly providing minors with alcohol. She was sentenced to 6 months incarceration in exchange for pleading guilty. And she served 2 months of her sentence before being released. You know, a lot of people talk about Brock Turner, who was sentenced to 6 months and was released within a few months. Well, here's an example of someone who had sex with 3 underage children and only had a 6-month term. But basically, statutory rape of 3 children, provided them alcohol, and put children's lives at danger by being drunk while on the job. And she got 6 months and only served 2 of those months. Let's see. Deborah Beasley Lefebvre, 23 years old, at Angelo L. Greco Middle School in Temple Terrace, Florida, when she was arrested for having multiple sex encounters with a 14-year-old student through various locations in the school, including performing oral sex on the male student in her classroom and having intercourse with him in portable classrooms located on the school campus. Although facing much more serious charges initially, she pled guilty to less serious offenses in light of the victim's mother learning the trial would be broadcast in court TV. She served no jail time for the crimes in question, and as a part of her sentence, she is a registered sex offender, served 3 years in house arrest, and 7 years on probation. So no jail time for having sex with a 14-year-old male. And she got house arrest. Ooh, fun. I mean, honestly, I'd rather see this woman in jail. But because she pleaded guilty and made a deal and all of that, she got a slap on the wrist. Okay, Lisa Lavoie. She had basically 6 counts of statutory rape, 3 counts of aggravated rape and abuse, 3 counts of statutory rape, and enticing of a minor regarding a 15-year-old male student. Now, she was arrested in 2009. Now, I looked this up because it wasn't listed here, but she served 18 months in jail. That was her crime. All of these, 6 counts statutory, 3 counts, all of that is worth 18 months. Autumn Leathers. She was arrested for having a sexual relationship with one of her students who was 15. Neighbors often saw the boy leaving her residence late at night. She got 1 year suspended sentence on the sex offender status. Now, it's good that she's on the sex offender status, but 1 year suspended means that she didn't actually serve that 1 year sentence. kind of means, though, that if she does anything else, then she could go back to jail for 1 year for that crime and whatever other crimes she committed. So basically, no jail time beyond her being arrested. Mary Kay, I can't pronounce that last name. I remember this growing up. And basically, she had sex with a student in elementary school. And she was married herself, and she had children with her husband and had an affair with an elementary school boy. Actually, it was with 2 children at the time. Oh, no, sorry. Just one. They later married and had 2 children, even though she served a jail sentence after the probation and after the jail time and probation. They ended up getting married and have 2 children now, and was even a Lifetime original movie. Let's see. Okay, so this was a cheerleading coach, an English teacher who had sex with a 16-year-old male. That was weird. Basically, she had 3 counts of sexual misconduct with a minor, which she pled guilty in May 2008, resulting in a 6-month sentence of jail and other conditions following her release. Lisa Robin Marinelli, 40 years old. Basically an incident where the father saw his son exit the woman's vehicle and zipped up his pants. 6-year-old male in question was initially dating her 15-year-old daughter. Following some legal move, she pled guilty to unlawful sex with a minor and was sentenced to 1 year under house arrest and registered as a lifelong sex offender. Imagine, again, genders reversed, that man would be going to jail for however long. She got house arrest. Let's see, did I get anyone else? Okay, so Abby Jane Swager. Now, this is an interesting one. So basically, she rented a hotel room, several teenagers aged 14 to 15, with a number of illicit items, including alcohol, pot, and also had an open condom wrapper. It was later revealed that she engaged in sex acts with young men as young as 14. She even had photos. There was photos leaked online, her being groped by 6 underage boys. She had 39 charges related to her illicit sexual behavior. 39 charges. Well, she pled guilty to 11 of the 39 charges and received 3 to 6 year sentence with 36 years of probation. And, of course, a lifelong sex offender. 39 charges. Again, flip the genders. A male teacher with 39 charges, he would be labeled a monster, a sexual predator, someone that really needed to go away. Feminists would claim, though, this is rape culture, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't even hear about this woman until I read this page. 39 charges, and she got 3 to 6 years for that. And that's how bad you have to be as a woman in this today's world. You have to have 39 charges to serve more than 1 year in prison. Okay, I think this might be the last one. Maybe, no, second to last. Tracy Tapp, 26, gym teacher. New Jersey with a 15-year-old boy. She had been previously involved in a long-term relationship with another underage student previously, and several other students came forward with information stating they had sexual contact with her. She pled guilty to a single misdemeanor charge of harassment by offensive touching, which carried no jail time and only a fine of $225. Talk about slap on the wrist. I mean, I know teachers don't make a lot of money, but I think they can afford $225. That she had sexual contact with several students and was involved in at least 2 relationships with underage students. Pamela Roger Turner, 27, Centertown Elementary School in Tennessee as a coach and teacher. Now this is interesting because she was involved with a 13-year-old student to which she pled no contest to charges, including sexual battery by an authority figure, which allowed her to serve 9 months in prison and an 8-year suspended sentence. I mean, a sexual battery? That just kind of scares me with what that actually means. However, upon release, Turner was found in violation of her agreement when she repeatedly contacted the alleged victim through the internet, sent to nude pictures and videos of herself. She was then sentenced to 8 years on her suspended sentence and had an additional 2 years added onto that, in conjunction with exposing the child to nude images of herself. So, I mean, she almost got away with it with kind of a slap on the wrist. I mean, 9 months in prison is 9 months in prison, but I'm glad that she ended up getting 10 years for this. So, yeah, that's going to be it for this. But the point of this is that boys, you know, do suffer abuse. Boys do suffer sexual abuse, and oftentimes they don't realize that they are victims in this case. But their would-be rapists are often given a slap on the wrist. And in many of these cases, these women either got away with it or had to suffer house arrest. Or if they did serve any jail time, it was for a very minimum amount. Like 1 year in many cases. You know, feminists talk about a rape culture all the time. How do they explain this? Well, I know how they explain it. It's like, well, this is patriarchy and blah, blah, blah. And these women were, you know, forced by the patriarchal system to rape boys. No. These boys that are the victims in these cases are ignored by society. In fact, there's one instance in Arizona where a boy was raped by his teacher. He was 13 at the time. She ended up getting pregnant, and when he turned 18, the state told him that he owed back child support for that child's life. 18 years old, and he is already in debt to the state because he was raped. That's justice. All right, so our next article today is on Bacha Bazi. This is rather disturbing. Bacha Bazi, literally boy play, is a slang term in Afghanistan for a wide variety of activities that involve child sexual abuse and pedestry. The perpetrator is commonly called Bacha Baz, which is pedophile. It may include to some extent, child pornography, sexual slavery, child prostitution, in which the prepubescent and adolescent boys are sold to wealthy or powerful men for entertainment and sexual activities. Now, Bachabazi has existed throughout history and is currently reported in various parts of Afghanistan. Force and coercion are a common component of this abuse, and security officials state they are unable to end it because many of the men involved are powerful and well-armed warlords, including former commanders of the Northern Alliance militia. So yeah, this is a very serious thing that mostly goes unchecked because, well, too many powerful men do it. So, but even if that's the case, we don't hear anything. We don't hear anything about this at all. This was the first I really ever heard about this, which really makes me disgusted. But we hear about all the bad things that happen to women. How is it that this is never part of the conversation? Now, maybe we can't do something now, but we can bring media awareness to this issue and maybe start, leaning on governments to take care of this problem, to give them bad PR. Now, during Taliban rule from 94 to 2001, it carried the death penalty. The practice of dancing boys is illegal under Afghan law, being both against Sharia law and the civil code. At one time, Sharia law comes in handy. But the laws are seldom enforced because powerful offenders and police have been reportedly complacent in related crimes. Now, a controversy arose after allegations surfaced that U.S. forces in Afghanistan, after the invasion of Afghanistan, deliberately ignored this practice. The U.S. military justified this by claiming the abuse was largely the responsibility of the local Afghan government. Now, before you throw the military under the bus on this one, higher echelon, sure, why not? But the lowly soldiers, just wait before you do that. Let me go ahead and go into the media coverage, which is not a lot, but there are a couple of things. In 2001, the documentary series on the BBC World Service addressed the concerns over the increased incidence of dancing boys and how this was at odds with the image which many wish to project about the post-Taliban future. In 2013, Vice Media Inc. documentary titled "This Is What Winning Looks Like," British independent filmmaker Ben Anderson described the systematic kidnapping, sexual enslavement, and murder of young men and boys by local security forces in Afghan city of Sanjan. The film depicts several scenes of Anderson along with American military personnel describing how difficult it is to work with the Afghan police, considering the blatant molestation and rape of local youth. The documentary also contained footage of American military advisor confronting the then acting police chief on the abuse after a young boy is shot in the leg after trying to escape a police barracks. When the Marines suggest that the barracks be searched for children and that any policeman found to be engaging in pedophilia be arrested and jailed, the high-ranking officer insists what occurs between the security forces and the boys is consensual, saying the boys like being there and giving their asses at night. He went on to claim that this practice was historic and necessary. If they don't fuck the asses of those boys, who should they fuck? The pussies of their grandmothers? This is the culture that we aligned ourselves to fight against the Taliban. In 2015, the New York Times reported that U.S. soldiers serving in Afghanistan were instructed by their commanders to ignore child sexual abuse being carried out by Afghan security forces, except when rape is being used as a weapon of war. American soldiers have been instructed not to intervene, in some cases, not even when their Afghan allies have abused boys on military bases, according to interviews in court records. But the U.S. soldiers have been increasingly troubled that instead of weeding out pedophiles, the U.S. military was arming them against the Taliban and placing them as police commanders of villages, doing little when they began abusing children. Because they were a potential ally, we looked the other way. That was the truth of it. And plus the fact that if it was little girls, then maybe the U.S. would have done something about it. But since it was little boys, it wasn't considered crucial to deal with. It was encouraged to look the other way. In 2011, an Afghani mother in Kunduz Province reported that her 12-year-old son had been chained to a bed and raped for 2 weeks by the Afghan local police commander. When confronted, the commander laughed and confessed. He was subsequently severely beaten by two U.S. Special Forces soldiers and physically thrown off the base. The soldiers were involuntarily separated from the military, but later reinstated after a lengthy legal case. In the military, you have to follow orders, but there's only so much these soldiers can take, and eventually they just snapped at this guy. And of course, this being war and politics and blah, 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 it makes the situation complex. However, we shouldn't be aligning ourselves with those who molest boys. Worse yet, it's not reported in the media. We don't really hear about these things in the media. Once in a while, we might get something here and there, but nothing really. So, moving on with the discussion of trafficking. Trafficking boys overlooked. So, males remain a largely invisible population within the dialogue of sex trafficking. According to a 2008 study by John Jay College of Criminal Justice, boys comprise about 50% of sexually exploited children in the sample done in New York, with most being domestic victims. However, the percent of male victims may be higher due to underreporting and the subversive nature of the crime. Now, as a society, they mention, we're conditioned as a community to identify female victims more readily, because that has been the more prominent focus on anti-trafficking movement. It's bad when it happens to a girl, and that deserves attention. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But boys are also likely to be victims as well. And by this study, at least 50%, if not more. And yet, no one cares. You think feminists might, but they don't. They only focus on women. You think the government might, they don't. They only focus on the women. It takes independent studies like this to even, maybe get the message out there that boys are being victimized in this way, and the world as a whole just doesn't care. This is why we need an International Day for the Boy, because there's a lot of atrocities that are committed against boys, and the world simply doesn't care. This falls under the preview of the UN. And what does the UN do? They do everything they can for women. They do everything they can for girls. And then tell boys, then tell men to give off your asses and help the girls. We don't care that you are a victim just like the girls. You got to do whatever you can to help women. Do whatever you can to help girls. That's the reality we live in. Continuing on. Despite the high percentage of commercially sexually exploited boys, a 2013 study indicates that boys and young men are rarely identified as people arrested for prostitution or rescued as human trafficking victims, and are arrested more for petty crimes such as shoplifting. Experts say that law enforcement attitude towards male victims are still weighed down by gender biases and trafficking discourse, which paints females as victims and male as perpetrators. Therefore, male victims in custody often fall through the cracks of services that could be offered to help them because they're not properly assessed for sexual exploitation. Responses are more or less the same. How can a boy be trafficked? They're much stronger than girls. They could get out of it if they wanted to, said Jenna Gold-Sobel, state policy coordinator of the ECPAT USA, which is a national anti-trafficking organization in New York. Many people often mistakenly associate male prostitution with homosexuality, when a majority of the trafficking youths are not gay. When people think about male prostitution, they think of it as a gay phenomenon, that boys are in control of what they're doing. They don't see them as victims. It's not an issue of sexual orientation. It's an issue of the right of circumstances which bring you to the exploitation or the vulnerability that brings you into being sexually exploited. Male victims come from similar backgrounds as female victims, often raised in broken families with a history of neglect and abuse, with at least 70% having experienced sexual abuse as children. This is very important, which is why I use hot pink to indicate its importance. Or is that purple or magenta? I'm not really sure. I do like that color, don't get me wrong. A 14-year-old male from the John Jay study who started prostitution at 12 said that his family's neglect contributed to his apathetic attitude towards his own life. My mother, she's lazy. She wouldn't care. She would care if I died, but that's all she cares about. The extent of their trauma is amplified due to their previous experiences with sexual violence from a young age, making it difficult for them to identify as victims. And now this is true for both boys and girls, that any trauma they suffered younger, they grow up believing that it's normal. They become... So when it happens to them, they justify it. But the problem is, because girls are recognized as being victims of sexual violence and sexual abuse, and boys are not, boys continue to grow up believing that this is the case and may turn around themselves being abusers. It has been shown that boys who are victims have a very good chance of growing up to be abusers. Now, this here is true that LGBT youth are more likely to be kicked out of their homes due to their sexual orientation or gender identity, but that composes about a third of this population. The other 2/3 are made up of non-gay youth and gay for pay victims or young heterosexual men who have had sex with other men. One 18-year-old male from the John Jay study said that although he was heterosexual, he slept with men to sustain himself. I just got to do what I got to do, and so I can eat every day. I don't like the fact that I have to be with another man just to survive. That's what I hate the most. So boys are bought and sold in both online and offline venues such as club, bars, and websites such as Backpages.com. Buyers are mostly white, upper-class men and are often professionals with lots of flexibility in their schedules. However, 40% of the boys in the study report that they've also had to serve female clients. So yeah, it's easy to like, well, it's all men who are doing this. This proves like patriarchy and all of that. Then how do you account for the women that they've also had to service? Women are just as bad as men in most cases. So identification of male victims is difficult not only to the lack of awareness or focus from law enforcement service providers, but also the reluctance of the boys to speak up. Victims are unwilling to come forward to service providers, which may include doctors, social workers, probation officers, due to feelings of shame and stigma. A lot of them don't see themselves as children and don't see themselves as victims and don't see themselves as having suffering abuse. So it puts a damper on the desire to go to any service professional. So yeah, we're almost done with this article. If you're watching this, feel free to leave a comment. All right, so Illinois passed the Safe Children Act in 2010, which is meant to protect minors who have been forced into prostitution from criminal prosecution and place them in the child welfare system instead of the criminal justice system. However, many victims are still reluctant to reveal their victimization because they're unwilling to enter the foster care system. And many who have been in the foster care system have actually reported very similar things to this. Hold on one second. I got an interesting tweet. I don't know if you can see this that I'm looking at. Oh, I just got followed. Okay. So, yeah, so the foster system can be as bad as what they're experiencing here. Male victims of trafficking also face a severe lack of aftercare and reintegration services, which many include both short-term and long-term housing options, education, and job placement programs, as well as mental health services. The youth from the study echoed this need for more long-term housing. An 18-year-old male from the study described the process of going from shelter to shelter. The shelters are 90 days. So I got to crash at a friend's house, stay in an open door type, and get my name back on the list to get another 90 days. According to the study, out of the 40 informants contacted, only 4 of the 25 shelters for commercially sexually exploited children serve boys, leaving them no choice but to return to their homes or the streets where they face potential re-exploitation. The absence of services tailored for male victims stem from the lack of general awareness and their experiences of victimization. Without more concrete numbers on male victims of trafficking, funders may be unwilling to donate to shelters specifically tailored for their needs. When you don't have statistics, it's hard to get funding. And if you don't have funding, then you're not helping victims when they get re-victimized and it comes full circle. So this right here, I mean, this really matches with what's going on in Afghanistan. But I mean, here, even in the United States or even in London, this is going on. And the problem is that there's nothing out there to help these individuals. There's plenty of things to help women because they're easily identified as victims. But when boys suffer the same thing, there's just not that many options for them. And more than likely will become re-victimized. God, this is starting to get to me. I'm not even part way through all of this. Oh, man, this is a lot to take in. All right, we need to keep moving forward. Now, this is an ongoing series, but I'm only going to really look. Okay, I don't know why the command prompt just came up. I'll have to look at that later. So this is talking about the sex trade in Cambodia, where it is boys and girls who are, but more attention's drawn to girls than it is for boys. Now, the person that they're mentioning in this article would like to do more to help the boys, but for now, the Oxford-trained psychologist says they're still learning how best to help them because their needs are so different from those of the girls. Boys are largely forgotten or ignored in sex tourism narrative. Everyone talks about the exploited girls. It's their images you see on posters and ads for charitable donations. So little research has been done on sexually exploited boys worldwide that estimates its prevalence very wildly. Now, the UN on drugs and crime doesn't have any estimates on victims of commercial sexual exploitation, but it does for human trafficking, which is close enough. It estimates that 2/3 of the victims are women, 13% are girls, 9% are boys, and the remainder are men, which is probably why the UN doesn't give a shit. But recent research in Cambodia, Ethiopia, Brazil, Peru, India, and other sex tourism hotspots indicate that boys are as likely as girls to be victims by traveling sexual predators. Some research even suggests that boys are more likely to be exploited. Now, this is talking about trying to rescue the boys. And what it states here is that once the boys are rescued, they stay at a few shelters. Well, there are a few shelters and few services to help them. But he says generally boys choose not to go to receive counseling or whatever. We offer them to aftercare programs, but they refuse. They think that what they were doing isn't harmful. They think it's the quickest way to get money. There's a certain logic to that. Most workers in Cambodia earn about $1 a day, while boys who have sex with men can earn anywhere from $10 to $50 a day. Oh, yeah. I guess you can't really blame them for doing that, given how much money you can make, especially in a place like Cambodia. But they don't see themselves as victims once again. They don't see any harm in what they're doing. So why help yourself when it's a very lucrative way to get money? We have to deprogram these children into that thinking. And I understand the thinking, but it's still wrong. Dozens, if not hundreds, of the estimated 3,200 non-governmental organizations here have programs to rescue, protect, counsel, empower, and educate, train, and reintegrate girls and young women back into their communities. But until 3 years ago, about the only program for boys and young men were related to AIDS. So another person they're talking about is Michael Munson. And he states that there's a Cambodian saying that sums all of this up, which is probably something that sums up this entire video that I'm doing today. Probably sums up the International Day of the Boy. And the saying is this: boys are like gold. Girls are like white cloth. If boys fall in the mud, it can be easily washed off. If girls do, the stain remains. And that's how boys are treated in this world. Hey, anything bad can happen to them, walk it off. Don't worry about it. You'll get over it. You know, we need to focus on the girls because they're forever stained by what happened to them. They can never get over what happened to them. And we need to take care of them for the rest of their lives. But that boy over there, no, he's fine. You know, just clean him up and he'll be okay. The belief reflected in the proverb is that boys do anything wrong. That if boys do anything wrong, they face no lasting consequences, social or emotional. Miles says Western perception of girls and boys are reflected in two Disney characters, Sleeping Beauty and Aladdin. Sleeping Beauty needs to be rescued, while Aladdin is a street kid, smart and self-sufficient, who's even envied by men because of his freedom. So, yeah. So this next goes to the Honey Badger page with Observing Libertarian. I've had him on my channel before. Pretty interesting guy. So we'll go through this one pretty quick. Now, this kind of speaks on the same issue, but it kind of goes a different direction. In India, a report by the Federation of Eunuchs state that every year between 20 to 25,000 men and boys are captured, kidnapped, or sold by their parents and forcibly castrated, no genitals left at all. Most are then forced into slavery, working as beggars or prostitute for local organized crime rings. Due to Indians' society caste system, men and boys turned in Hydra, despite whether it was forced upon them, have no chance to live in Indian society except as Hydra. Very recently, within the last few years, they've been recognized as a third gender, even though it was forced upon them in most cases. And they have been given a lot more equality within society. But, I mean, we're talking about boys who are captured, kidnapped, and then having their genitals cut off. And I read how this happens, and whoa, my God, that's an image I'll never get out of my head. That's just, oh my God. You thought boys getting circumcised was bad. If you ever actually seen a video of that, you'll know what I'm talking about. But just even reading about the practice, that's horrific. Why anyone would do this. So in 1990, this guy, whose name that I could probably never, Subramaniam, he wrote a paper on his research of making an eunuch. The study report that most eunuchs in India were the result of forced castration. The method adopted for the surgery is crude, unscientific, and threatening to the health of the patient, and done in the most unhygienic condition. Yeah, we won't really go over that. You can read the article for yourself on this. yeah, I don't want to read it. I'm sorry. This is just hard. All of this is hard to discuss. So I'm already a little on the edge, so I just don't really want to read it again. But I'll continue on. How can castration be destiny? How pertinent a question. How mind-baffling. How painful. But no one in the government or the courts has tried to stop the destiny of castration. While giving hydras their human rights, opportunities for good education, jobs, and comfortable living, what needs to be ensured with great vehemency is that no more eunuchs are created. According to the surveys carried out, the number of eunuchs in India is around 90 lakhs. The natural justice does not merely demand good life for existing eunuchs, but also total and effective ban on the creation of eunuchs and rigorous punishment to those involved in the trade. Now, Marshall here points it out to us that a lakhs is 100,000. So 19 of them is 1.9 million. I'm sure a percentage volunteered for this. I don't know why, but we can assume a vast majority of that didn't. Even if it was 50-50, we're talking about 1 million children who were had their genitals forcibly cut off. Where's the outcry? Where's the world giving a shit? Where's the UN saying that we need to deal with this issue? Silence is what boys get. Hey, it's already happened to them, so no need to worry about that. Oh, is it going to happen to more? Oh, I guess that's okay so long as it's not girls, right? Look, bad things happen to girls. I don't deny that. But bad things also happen to boys. But it's even worse for boys because no one cares. People who do this to boys, most of them go... Oh, I'm sorry. My mind is starting to go. Most of them get off scot-free. They face no punishment for what they do. And instead, we focus on mansplaining and manspreading. You know, feminists claim that they want equality, but when something like this is happening, and I'd rather deal with this to try to fix it. But instead, I'm dealing with feminists in the Western world who want to complain over every little silly thing they possibly can, rather than trying to find a solution so we can look at the rest of the world and try to fix the problems there. But no, we have to be concerned because someone said something mean to girls about their vaginas. That's the big issue now. Let's not care about anything else. Donald Trump is a misogynist, despite many other girls, you know, sexually objectifying themselves or other women. Why have to deal with that problem instead of problems like this? And that's why I do this video today. Because this needs to be explained. This needs to be said. Yeah, Dean Corwin has it right. I don't know if you can see this or not. Says, hey, Mad Cat, but feminists are saying that they want to help men. Yeah, no, they don't. Hashtag kill all men and hashtag kill all white men. And feminism is cancer. All right, so going to skip past this. Oh, this one. This is definitely a trigger warning. So, I mean, oh, God, I'm just going to, like, after I'm done with this video, I'm just going to turn off all the lights and put my sleep mask on and just hide because, oh, this is horrible. Sorry. Is that me cutting myself, Mom? A bloodstained Shiite boy clutching a huge knife joins his young friends in a bloody Muslim celebration marking the sacrifice of the prophet's godson. Now, from what I can understand, apparently Muhammad's grandson committed some crime and Muhammad had to kill him. So, not all Muslims, I am putting that out there, not all Muslims practice this, but there's a certain sect of Muslims that do. This is graphic. So, and here we have a picture of a boy cutting into his forehead and then looking at the picture that his mother took. And as bad as this isn't the worst part. And you can see other boys doing it as well. I mean, look at that. It looks like he can barely hold that in his hands, and yet he's using that to cut into his own scalp. So in another picture taken during the festival, a Pakistani boy is clutching a whip made from chains and blades as he prepares to flagellate himself, I know I'm mispronouncing that, to mark the Muslim festival as Ashura. The young child, who looks barely old enough to understand what is happening, has a look of fear in his eyes as he clutches the razor blade flail. With small cuts already visible on his tiny face and wearing no shirt on his back, the young Shiite Muslim boy was pictured as he prepared to take part in the Ashura commemorations in Pakistan. So here are some more pictures. I'm not going to play the video, but this is the boy. This boy took that chains with basically razor blades at the end and used it to flail his back. Where's the atrocity? Where's the people of the world angry about this? Sorry, I'm just starting to have tears well up. So we got some pictures here of a man doing this to himself. Yeah, look at that. All that blood. And then we can see some of the damage that's done to them, and looks like they're trying to stop the bleeding, giving them stitching. Yeah. Telling young men that they have to do this, young boys that they have to do this. It's a part of a celebration of their faith. Some younger men doing it here. And here we can see some evidence of boys actually doing it. Look at all of that blood on the floor there. A man is cutting his son with a knife. Oh, man. Oh, God, I knew this would be hard, but oh, man. I mean, I've been looking at these images, but I've just been like focusing on the show. I think this is the first time I've actually really looked at all of this and really just dealt with it. But I won't show the pictures again. But I mean, a little boy is told to take this weapon and hurt yourself with it. Where the fuck are you, UN? How the hell are you complacent with this? How the hell can you say that the Muslim religion is the most peaceful religion in the world when this kind of shit happens? No, not all Muslims do this. Granted. but there are some sects that do. So we go from distressing to depressing when we talk about Boko Haram. So I won't go through this complete article, but I will talk a little bit about it. So in the forest of the thorn trees somewhere far outside the city, the Boko Haram insurgency ran a boot camp for about 100 boys. Children as young as 5 years old learned to handle assault rifles, marching through the woods in flip-flops. Their teachers were only 15. You know, when Boko Haram kidnapped all of those girls, the world woke up to the dangers of Boko Haram, and yet we knew this stuff was going on for a long time. Where children, where boys were being forced to serve in the military. See, it's easy for us to hate men who are in these militias, but most of them were forced into it as children. It's the only life they know. I was terrified if I didn't do it, they would kill me, said Idris, the teenage instructor. He said he was kidnapped by the militants in 2014, but has since escaped. While the world focused on Boko Haram's mass kidnapping of women and girls, the Islamic group was stealing an even greater number of boys. Over the past 3 years, Boko Haram has kidnapped more than 10,000 boys and trained them in boot camps, in abandoned villages and forest hideouts, according to government officials in Nigeria and neighboring Cameroon, and to Human Rights Watch, a New York-based advocacy group. Interviews with 6 young Nigerians who escaped Boko Haram captivity with other witnesses, soldiers, researchers, officials, and diplomats in Nigeria and Cameroon provided a picture of the harrowing life endured by the children who waged jihad. Witnesses said the boys were trained and sent into the battle, at times unarmed and often outnumbered with opiates. No, often numbed with opiates, unarmed and numbed with opiates. Many of the boys were beaten and some died of starvation or thirst. These people said their individual accounts couldn't be independently verified, but are consistent with information gathered by researchers and military officials, both in terms of timing and specific details. They told us it's all right for you to kill and slaughter even your parents, a former captive said as he witnessed a beheading on the first day of his 11 months with Boko Haram. He said other boys helped hold down the victim. They said, this is what you have to do to go to heaven. I mean, I don't have to say it, but this is child abuse. And yet the only thing we cared about with Boko Haram is what they did to girls. Now, a girl who was a slave there, a hostage, said, if you go there, you can see 12-year-olds talking about burning down villages. They have converted. You know, it's not too hard to convert a child into this, especially if that's your end goal. I don't think there's anything more to this article. There's a lot to this article, a lot of eyewitness accounts to it, but oh. All right, so moving on to the next thing, we'll talk about Boko Haram. This happened about 2 years ago. At least 59 children had been killed in Nigeria after Islamic gunmen opened fire at a boarding school before burning it to the ground. Now, they targeted a secondary school as students slept in a dormitory. The gunman opened fire on the students' living quarters. Some of the student bodies were burned to ashes. Let me jump down to the part. By the way, Boko Haram actually means Western education is sinful. Police said that all the victims in Monday attack were boys, and the school's 24 buildings, including staff quarters, were completely destroyed by fire. And as bad as that is, it actually gets a lot worse. So at least 40 students were killed in September at an agricultural training college in Yobe after Boko Haram gunmen stormed a series of dorms in the middle of the night and sprayed gunfire on sleeping students. This month, they killed more than 300. Oh, this doesn't have what I was specifically looking for. But basically, before the Save Our Girls that was spearheaded by Michelle Obama, months prior, there were several boys that were killed in their sleep, some of them. Others were locked up into the building that was set on fire and that was burned to the ground. Other boys who tried to flee and escape were shot. And considering the outcome of all the boys, they might have been the luckiest of the set, of the group, that were just gunned down and killed instantly rather than burning alive. You know, as bad as rape is, you can recover from rape. You can't recover from death. Death is permanent. And these were young boys that died. Where was the outrage? Most of the world didn't even know this. And those who didn't even really know about it until Save Our Girls was a thing. The world didn't care. But the moment you kidnap a girl, oh, the whole U.S. military wants to take action. But you do something to a boy? It's just a boy. Who really cares? So, I mean, we've got sex trade. We've got teachers molesting boys. We've got boys that are forced into war. And boys that are burned to death because they want to learn. And in all of these, so far, no one really cared. The world didn't. Feminists didn't. The UN didn't. UN would actually have some measure to do something, or at least raise awareness about this. The media, just the same. They could raise awareness about this and didn't. And don't. Because it's better to care about women than it is to ever care about a boy. And that's why we need an International Day of the Boy. It's for shit like this that goes unanswered. That just goes by the wayside. Who cares? Who cares at all? All right, I don't have much time. I need to get through this stuff pretty quickly. So this here is saying that 70% of children are killed by one parent, which is usually their mothers, and 60% of the victims are boys. We don't often hear about this. Occasionally we do, but it often gets like overlooked. Child labor. Now this is something that's reported on, but the problem is that it's reported on in a very poor way. We don't actually learn about gender very often. It's usually saying like 90 million children. But the only time gender becomes an issue in this is when it's something that happens to girls more than it happens to boys. But we very rarely hear anything that happens about boys over girls. And I'll give you an example of this. This whole thing keeps talking about children in every single thing except for the last line here. Child labor amongst girls fell 40% since 2000 compared to 25% for boys, which is open for a lot of interpretation. It could seem that so many more girls were forced into child labor than boys, and we've had a serious decrease in that. What it tells me is that there's more focus on girls than there are boys. So let me give you another example. So this is by UNICEF, which is 70 years for every child. So this talks about children, being forced into labor throughout the world. Okay, so let's do a search for girls. Okay, so some 120 million among them below the ages of 14, while for the 30 million children in this age group, mostly girls, perform unpaid household chores within their families. I would need to do some research to really understand what that means, but since I was 10, I took out the trash every day. It's probably not the same thing, but I mean, that I was unpaid for household chores. I was just told to go do it. And mow the lawn, by the time I was 13. Here we are mentioning girls again. For example, the estimated 15.5 million children, domestic workers worldwide, mostly girls, are often hardly visible and face many hazards. Okay, what about boys? There we go. Nothing. There's no mention on this page about boys. Now, we know they're affected because you keep saying the words, mostly girls, but there's nothing on this page at all about boys. And that says something. That the only time we really care is about girls. I mean, truth is right here, black and white and blue. You might say that I'm reading too much into this, but I'm not. So here's a report on the global estimate trends of child labor from 2000 to 2012. So let's do a search for boys. Now, in this entire 60-page document, boys are only mentioned 7 times. Again, 40% compared to the 25% decline. Let's do it again. 40% compared to the 25% decline. Okay, here's actually something good. So, child labor involvement is much higher amongst boys than girls for the 5 to 17-year age group as a whole, which is 99.8 million boys versus 68.2 million girls. We're talking about a difference of 30 million. 30 million more boys are forced into labor than girls. And here we can actually see the difference. Child unemployment, child labor, and hazardous work. And we're talking about a huge margin here. 148,000 in 2012 compared to 116,000. About 30,000 difference. 99,000 in child labor for boys compared to 68,000. Nearly about 30,000 difference. and 55,000 for hazardous work versus 30,000. Remember all the hazardous work that they mentioned for girls? Boys deal with it a lot more, by a difference of almost 25,000. And yet, in all of the websites I research, I mean, I'm glad I found this. I'm glad to see these actual numbers. And we can see that, you know, girls are declining at a much more accelerated rate than boys are. Why is that happening? And I'll tell you why I think it's happening. Because the world is more concerned about what happens to girls. So girls are declining and boys are having to pick up the slack. And even though they are declining, they're not declining in rapid rates because they have to make up for the girls. That's one hypothesis I have. I don't know. I haven't fully studied this. Okay, so now this issue is about boys in custody and the women who abuse them. The Justice Department first discovering the startling form of abuse in 2010 when it surveyed more than 9,000 youngsters living in juvenile halls and group homes. More than 10% of the respondents said that they'd been sexually abused by staff, and 92% said their abuser were female. Drawing on their sample, the Justice Department researchers estimated that 1,390 juveniles in facilities they examined have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of the staff supervising them at a rate of nearly 8%. 20% have said that they were victimized by staff, and it happened on more than 10 occasions. 9 out of the 10 victims were male abused by female staff. Now, this comes into prison, and that these males, they're bad, so rape happening to them is not that bad. And of course, a woman can't rape a male. So that's why this issue goes ignored. But there's a good quote here. When you have an extreme power differential and absolute unchecked power, bad things start happening. When you combine this with a culture where sex abuse by females on males isn't taken seriously, then you have the perfect setup for women with all this power to get away with it. There's something else that was said, but it was basically these children need to learn proper discipline and respect. And when they're being sexually abused like this by an abuse of power, they are not getting that opportunity to learn that. Now, the honey badgers, this is an article by Hannah Wallen, a good friend of mine. This actually reports on that exact thing. I can't go over this right now because I'm running out of time. I didn't expect it to take this long, and I do have something else to do today. But go ahead and take a look at this article. I will try to link all of these articles later today. But this talks about that as well. In fact, there was actually a letter by a staunch feminist who was defending all of this that wrote a letter to Allison Tiemann. There's actually, I think it was on A Voice for Men that actually displays this if you ever get a chance to look at that. So one thing I want to go over, now this was mostly talking about men who are the sexual abuse victims of female perpetrators, but it does talk about boys just a little bit. But these are some of the things that can happen to boys who are raped, whether by their teachers, by their parents, or even authority figures. They can have a lot of anger built up inside, the feeling of betrayal, fear, feeling helpless, having homosexuality issues. Now, this is not to say that those who are homosexuals were abused. This is to say that boys who are sexually abused predominantly by men, but it can happen with females as well. But they were abused by males, will question whether or not they're homosexual, and they'll be very confused by this. Isolation and alienation, legitimacy, that they believe that there was nothing wrong with what happened to them, loss, masculinity issues, negative childhood peer relations. They feel that they cannot connect to children their own ages, negative schemas about people, difficulty trusting people, negative schemas about themselves. They really feel bad about themselves. Problems with sexuality, self-blame, guilt, and shame and humiliation. And now this is mostly untreated. When boys experience rape in their lives, sexual assault in their lives, there's very little help that is given to them. So they grow up with all of these feelings inside of them with very little resources to help them. And they come out in actually very predictable ways. The last issue that I'm going to talk about today is education. Obviously, boys are being left behind in this. Feminists in the 1970s said that the school system favored male thinking with facts, dates, math skills, and they were too masculine from girls. And since that time, schools have transformed into a system that's leaving boys behind. Dr. Ken Harlan and Sam McCready from the University of Ulster said that the problem has been clear for several decades, but that it's extremely difficult for research teams to find specific strategies for addressing boys underachieving. Even school teachers have been aware of it, but it hasn't caused them to change their teaching styles to try to get boys up. They've stuck to the same thing. But it has been found that boys are underachieving in primary and secondary school. And it's because of the feminist-dominated ideology and academia and policy making. And this goes on later to affect colleges, that in 1960s, 160% more males graduated college than females. But the ratio is now 135 to 100 males that graduate every year. So far more females are graduating college than males. But let's get back to elementary school. Now, there have been U.S. studies as well in examining test scores and grades of children in kindergarten through 5th grade. Cornwell found that boys in all racial categories are not being consumerally graded by their teachers in any subject as their test scores would predict. The answer lies in the way teachers, who are statistically mostly women, evaluate students without reference to objective test scores. Boys are regularly graded well below their actual academic performance. Boys are falling significantly behind in grades despite performing at least as well as girls on math tests and significantly better in science fields. Now, something I found in my research is that if there is a boy that excels beyond girls in any subjects, teachers will have favoritism towards them and they will outperform. But the average boy versus the average girl, average boys do less in non-cognitive skills. Well, they're graded on non-cognitive skills, especially within reading and English and things like that. And this happens, so they get lower grading when it's a teacher assigned grade. When the teacher decides what something is worth, that's when boys statistically get lower grades. But when it's with something that has a definitive answer and that you have to use a key sheet to make a grade, boys do just fine. So there is a bias here. So it was also reported that the majority of D's and F's in most schools are by boys, that 90% of disciplinary problems are boys, and 4 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed with ADHD and to be medicated, account for 3 out of 4 children diagnosed with learning disabilities, become 80% of the high school dropout, and now make up less than 45% of college population. And as he says, if you look in the newspaper right now, in June, you will see the photos and bios of valedictorians from many of your local high schools, and will notice that the majority of them these days are girls. So that's going to do it right now for all of this. This was more just a report on what's going on. Taking a look at some of the articles. Celtic Rune Singer, always good to see you. Michelle Obama just did humanitarian effort for girls only. Michelle Obama hates men and boys. Hello to you, Tony. That's a good joke. A nice way to lighten up the mood. If vegetarians eat vegetables, what do humanitarians eat? I've heard that joke before, but I guess I just needed a good joke right now. This is hard to go over. Boys are being left behind in the world. I mean, look at the things we've discussed. Teachers raping boys, getting slapped on the wrists. Boys being forced to dance for rich men, and sexually molested. Boys being trafficked and being, prostitutes and having very little resources to help them. Happening all across the world, in Afghanistan, even the United States, Cambodia, India. Boys being kidnapped and castrated, their genitals cleanly removed off of their skin in the most heinous way. Little boys having their heads cut into. I know I said I wouldn't show any more pictures, but using a whip made out of chains and razor blades on their own back. Little boys. Boys being captured and forced to serve in a military such as Boko Haram. Boys being locked in a school and set on fire. And the only time we ever cared about Boko Haram is when they kidnapped girls. Boys are more likely to be killed by their mothers than girls are. And, child labor is a big issue, but we care more about it when it happens to girls than it does boys. The only time we get any information about boys is when girls outnumber boys in something. And even this entire article, and no mention of boys whatsoever. And yet this is supposed to be something for the children. We see the numbers right here. Boys are more of a victim of this than girls, and yet more focus is put onto girls. Boys in custody are raped. No one cares. So, there's an actual problem here. Boys in this world are being left behind. And yet the UN has the goals to have an international day for girls and doesn't even think once that maybe we should also have an international day for boys. Well, fuck that. We have an international day for boys now. It is today, the day after. And until the UN makes an international day for boys every year after International Day for Girls, I will make an International Day for boys, even if I'm the only one celebrating it. And I will show this kind of stuff every year until it happens. We cannot let boys disappear from this world. I understand needing to help girls, but we also need to help boys in the same breath. We need to help children. It shouldn't be the International Day for girls. It should be the International Day for children. So, anyways, this was just really, Madcast Smash. This was just to talk about these things, not to go into great detail about them. Please share this. Because, you know, feminists accuse us all the time that we don't care about, you know, any of these other issues. We do. We're too busy fighting the issues in the Western states. And we need a clean house here first before we try to disseminate across the rest of the world to deal with these problems. And feminists want to waste our time because Trump said something in private to another man. That's the big issue now. Let's deal with what Trump said. And at least even look at the emails that Hillary had released. Feminists, you have everything you want. Why don't you start dealing with the rest of the world rather than trying to get yourself a safe space in every conceivable place you can? There are other issues out there in the world that needs to be dealt with. How about we start acting like adults and deal with the problems here and say, you know what, we have it pretty good here. Let's fix the minor issues that we have and start working on the rest of the world. We could do it. It just requires you to get your head out of your ass. Anyways, please share this video out. Please make Twitter posts about the International Day for Boys or Day of the Boy, hashtag Day of the Boy. And let's create October 12th as the day for boys, as the day that boys are being forgotten in this world, and we will not forget them. We want to raise awareness about this. We want the UN to take the plight of boys more seriously. We want the news media to take the plight of boys more seriously. And not just in the United States, not just in the Western world, but in the whole world. Because bad things are happening in boys every single day, and no one cares because they're not girls. And people are getting away with it. Because we care more about what happens to a girl than we care what happens to a boy. I'm not saying we stop caring what happens to a girl. I'm saying we start caring what happens to children. I'm saying that we start caring what happens to humans. Not divide this amongst gender, not to divide this amongst race. We treat it as one issue. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for everyone for coming out. I love the people in the chat. Sorry I couldn't display you in the chat. I have actually two windows going on at the same time. I will try to get the articles posted in the link down below if you want to check those out today, but that'll be later today. I do have to go do something, so follow me on Twitter, ggmad_cat. If you like what I do, consider doing my Patreon. If you're not comfortable doing Patreon, consider buying my book. There's a link down below for that. Anyways, this is Mad Cat signing off.